Hello and welcome back. We have been discussing the debate between Mary's learning vis-a-vis Jackson's knowledge argument and Dennett's robo-Mary, and we will now continue and see the philosophical insights between this debate. Mary's learning debate. Jackson's argument suggests a fundamental gap between physical knowledge and phenomenal experience. Dennett counters that any perceived learning is an illusion caused by incomplete information about how subjective experiences are encoded physically. Functionalism versus phenomenalism is yet the other philosophical insight that emerges from Jackson's Mary argument and Dennett's robo-Mary. Dennett's functionalism reduces consciousness to computational processes, while Jackson's earlier dualism insists on irreducible qualities of experience. Number 3. Influence on current thought. Jackson's argument fuels ongoing debates about the hard problem of consciousness, while Dennett's critiques encourage computational and naturalistic approaches to consciousness in neuroscience and AI. Further, here is a comparative table that would examine Jackson's Mary argument, Dennett's robo-Mary, and Agnes Balog's blue banana thought experiment with detailed philosophical insights. These three thought experiments has been curated to make us understand the concept of the hard problem of consciousness vis-a-vis the critiques from the materialistic school. Just to remind all of us, Jackson has been a phenomenalist. However, he had converted to the materialistic position vis-a-vis the dialogue or the influence of Daniel Dennett, and Agnes Balog's blue banana thought experiment is to show the discussion that goes beyond the Mary and the robo-Mary. So if we see in this slide now, we see the core premise, Jackson's argument, Dennett's robo-Mary, and Balog's blue banana thought experiment. Mary, as we understand by now under Jackson's, is a scientist who knows all physical facts about color but has never experienced it, learned something new, qualia, upon seeing red. Dennett's robo-Mary has been an advanced robot that knows all physical facts, can stimulate human understanding, and predict experiences, negating the need for qualia. On the other hand, the newly included third part of this project has been Balog's blue banana thought experiment, where we are asked to imagine a new color like bluish yellow, which cannot exist in normal human vision. Even with complete physical knowledge, experiencing such a color seems conceptually impossible. The objective of these three thought experiments have been, in the first, to challenge physicalism by showing the complete physical knowledge does not encompass subjective experience. Dennett's has been to refute the knowledge argument by showing that knowing all physical facts entails understanding subjective experiences. And Balog's blue banana thought experiment is to explore whether there are limits to physicalism's ability to explain conceptual and perceptual impossibilities. Now, the view on qualia, Jackson's view has been very clear, where he says that qualia are non-physical properties irreducible to physical facts, revealing the explanatory gap. Dennett's robo-Mary, qualia are illusions. Subjective experiences can be fully explained by physical processes and functional states. Balog's blue banana thought experiment states that qualia may have conceptual limits defined by the structure of perception, challenging purely physicalist accounts. Now, if we are to talk about the methodology, we would see that in Jackson's Mary argument, a thought experiment based on intuition about the distinction between physical knowledge and experience. Dennett's methodology is a counter-thought experiment that applies functionalism and computational models to explain subjective experience. Balog's blue banana thought experiment is focusing on the conceptual boundaries of perception and imagination within physical constraints. Philosophical position. The first supports dualism or property dualism, suggesting some aspects of consciousness cannot be reduced to physical explanations. The second supports physicalism and functionalism, arguing that all mental phenomena can be explained by physical processes. The third, that is Balog's blue banana thought experiment, straddles a middle ground, questioning the boundaries of physicalism without fully endorsing dualism. If we are to talk about the criticisms of opponent, we would see that in Jackson's physicalism fails to encounter for subjective experience or the what it is like aspect of consciousness. Dennett's Robomary experiment is flawed intuitions about experiences and ignores the completeness of physical explanations. Balog's blue banana thought experiment challenges Dennett's idea that complete physical knowledge can resolve all experiential or conceptual puzzles. Now, what are the key philosophical insights? In the former, we see highlights an explanatory gap between objective physical facts and subjective experiences. The second argues that subjective experiences are narratives or constructs grounded in physical processes, not irreducible phenomena. The third suggests that some experiential or conceptual phenomena may lie beyond physical explanation due to inherent limits of perceptual systems. Now, if we are to talk about the strengths and weaknesses, the strength of the first thought experiment intuitively is compelling, for it underscores the apparent mystery of subjective experience. The second offers a mechanistic explanation that aligns with modern neuroscience and cognitive science. The third explores the tension between physical knowledge and the conceptual structure of perception, adding nuance to the debate. The weaknesses: the first relies heavily on intuition, vulnerable to Dennett's critique that knowledge all physical facts entails knowing subjective experiences. The second downplays the richness of phenomenal experience, which critics argue is inadequately captured by functional explanations. And the third, weaknesses of the Balog's blue banana thought experiment, is the hypothetical nature of impossible perceptions can make its implications for physicalism ambiguous. The broader implications have been that Jackson's Mary argument suggests that physicalism may need supplementations or revisions to account for consciousness. Dennett's Robomary's strengthens physicalist approaches, supporting naturalistic models of consciousness in neuroscience. And Balog's blue banana thought experiment raises questions about whether perceptual and conceptual boundaries create irreducible limits on human understanding. So our question then is, what are the philosophical insights from these three thought experiments? We can state by saying that on qualia, Jackson emphasizes qualia as irreducible and central to the mystery of consciousness, while Dennett argues they are constructs that dissolve upon deeper examination. The third, Balog's viewpoint or Balog's thought experiment is significant, for he offers a nuanced view exploring whether qualia are constrained by perceptual structures rather than intrinsic irreducibility. The second philosophical insight from the three arguments could be the explanatory gap. Jackson and Balog both highlight gaps in physicalist explanations, though Balog focuses more on the boundaries of perception than the intrinsic qualities of experiences. Dennett denies any true gap, asserting that complete physical knowledge resolves these issues. The third philosophical insight is between perception versus knowledge. All three arguments engage with the limits of physicalism in explaining how perception ties to knowledge and subjective experience, providing complementary perspectives on this central issue in philosophy of mind. So, these thought experiments collectively enrich the discourse, offering different angles to probe the limits of understanding consciousness. This comparison shows how their thought experiments address core issues in philosophy of mind, offering contrasting lenses to explore the mysteries of consciousness. Now, we will be interested in knowing what is the philosophical connect and how has the gaps been filled, if any, between Dennett, Jackson and Balog. The philosophical connection between Jackson, Dennett and Agnes Balog lies on their engagement with the nature of consciousness, the explanatory gap, and the relationship between physical facts and subjective experiences. While each thinker approaches these issues differently, their ideas have influenced and shaped ongoing debates in philosophy of mind. Below is an analysis of their connections, gaps, and how these gaps have been addressed or reinterpreted over time. Firstly, the common ground. All the three philosophers, Jackson, Dennett and Balog, grapple with the fundamental challenge of explaining consciousness within a physicalist framework. Jackson's merry argument initially highlighted an explanatory gap between physical knowledge and subjective experience, suggesting that physicalism is incomplete. Dennett refuted this gap by arguing that complete physical knowledge necessarily includes an understanding of subjective experience, proposing a functionalist, mechanistic approach to mind. On the other hand, Agnes Balog extended the conversation by questioning not only the explanatory gap but also the conceptual boundaries of perception and imagination. Their shared focus is on whether subjective experiences can be fully accounted for by physical or computational processes. Now, if we highlight the table as displayed here, we would see what I was mentioning or talking about. The explanatory gap. In the first instance, the Jackson's approach has been he had posited a clear gap. Physical knowledge does not include what it feels like. Dennett, on the other hand, denied the explanatory gap, claiming that physical knowledge includes functional and phenomenal aspects. Balog, on the other hand, acknowledges conceptual limits to human perception but focuses on structural constraints rather than intrinsic gaps. Further, if we are to talk about the nature of qualia, we see that in Jackson's approach, he treated qualia as irreducible, non-physical entities. Dennett's counter argued that qualia are illusory, emerging from flawed intuitions. Balog, on the other hand, explores qualia as limited by perceptual architecture, that is, conceptual impossibilities like a blue banana. Further, the gap of knowledge versus experience under Jackson's approach, we see that he differentiates between propositional knowledge and experiential knowledge. Dennett, on the other hand, argued that complete physical knowledge bridges this divide. Balog, on the other hand, highlighted that some experiences are conceptually unthinkable even with complete knowledge. Further, if we are to talk about the gaps of completeness of physicalism, we see that under Jackson's approach, initially he rejected physicalism, but later revised to accept it with a more nuanced view. Dennett strongly defends physicalism through a functionalist approach. Balog questions whether physicalism can account for all conceivable and inconceivable phenomena. So we see that the philosophical connects and influences, if we are to talk about Dennett and Jackson, the connection that we see is Dennett's Robomary was a direct critique of Jackson's Mary argument, questioning the premise that physical knowledge is insufficient. The influence we see again, Jackson had later revised his stance, embracing a more physicalistic interpretation of his own argument, likely influenced by criticisms like Dennett's. There also has been an unresolved tension, and the debate remains about whether the phenomenal aspect of experience can ever be fully captured by physical accounts. Now, if we are to deal with Jackson and Balog, the philosophical connects and influences, we would see under connection maybe that Balog's blue banana thought experiment extends Jackson's critique by suggesting that not all perceptual possibilities are even conceptually accessible, adding a layer to the explanatory gap. The influence, if we are to see, we notice that Balog reaffirms the importance of subjective experience, but does so by questioning perceptual and conceptual limits rather than positing non-physical properties. Now, if we are to compare and contrast Dennett and Balog, we would see that Balog's work indirectly critiques Dennett's functionalist approach by pointing out that computational or physical explanations may fail to account for inherently inconceivable phenomena, like a new color, bluish yellow banana. Though we understand the concept of bluish yellow, it is very difficult to comprehend the banana that is bluish yellow. So the influence, we acknowledge that Balog complicates Dennett's claim that physicalism is complete, suggesting that perception's structural constraints might limit him with what even a perfect physical explanation can achieve. Now, our focus or our foundation would be how do we bridge the gaps, or what is the way out. And here we would like to address that we can talk about the reconciliation of physicalism and qualia in our attempt of bridging the gaps. Dennett's illusionist stance minimizes the role of qualia, but critics argue it oversimplifies the richness of subjective experience. Philosophers like Balog contribute by exploring perceptual limits without rejecting physicalism outright. Jackson's later acceptance of physicalism signals a possible reconciliation where physicalism can address qualia through broader interpretative frameworks. Perception as structurally limited. Balog shifts the debate by highlighting that not all conceivable experiences fit within our perceptual and conceptual systems. This introduces a middle ground. Physicalism might explain actual experiences, but face challenges with conceptually impossible experiences. So we see that there has been a journey that has been traveled from dualism to functionalism. Jackson's initial dualist leanings gave way to physicalist interpretations influenced by functionalists like Daniel Dennett. Balog, however, invites further explanation into whether physicalism's scope is inherently constrained. We thus see that the philosophical connections between Dennett, Jackson and Balog show an evolution in addressing the mind-body problem and consciousness. Jackson's challenge to physicalism initiated a debate that Dennett refined and Balog complicated. And this is precisely the reason why we have put all these three philosophers in the same parameter in this lecture today: Jackson, Dennett and Balog. Jackson has been picked up for he had started off as a phenomenalist who had celebrated the existence of qualia with what Mary did not know thought experiment, and then he shifted his position to being a physicalist. Now this shift of Jackson's position from phenomenalism to physicalism is significant, for it talks about a reconciliation or the bridge that he very happily walks over from being a phenomenalist to a physicalist, and that is for a lot of inter-dialogues that have happened with a lot of physicalist thinkers, including Daniel Dennett. And because Daniel Dennett has had a strong impact on Jackson's thought process, it was significant that we did bring up Daniel Dennett here. Daniel Dennett's position has been very clear from the very starting, that he's a staunch physicalist, he's a staunch materialist, and there is no changing the position. To his credit, Dennett had also been successful in getting Frank Jackson get converted to the physicalist model. However, as a student of philosophy, we should all understand that most of our discussions are always open-ended, and it is this open-endedness that makes philosophy extremely rich and tirelessly curious. And for this, we had brought in the third philosopher who has been famous for his blue banana thought experiment, and that is Professor Balog. Professor Balog's emphasis has been clear that as much as he understands the physicalist strengths, he still has some questions against the very physicalist position, and that is where he plays. He very subtly critiques or criticizes Daniel Dennett and tries to empathize with the phenomenalist or the dualist school, and he tries to go beyond the picture given by Dennett in the form of happily ever after, and Balog in his own thought experiment tries in his own native way to fill the gap. So we see that while Dennett claims to fill the gap with functionalism, Balog's emphasis on perceptual and conceptual limits suggests that some aspects of consciousness may still elude complete explanation. Their collective work continues to push the boundaries of how we understand the interplay between physical facts, subjective experiences, and the limits of human cognition. With this, we come to an end of our lecture series on Daniel Dennett vis-a-vis Frank Jackson and Balog. I have also given the readings should anyone be interested in looking up for more discussion ahead. Thank you so much for being connected.